All right, let's go ahead and get things started. So my name is Mariam and I work at Just Treatment, and I'll be co-hosting this call with Izzy, a volunteer Just Treatment leader who you're going to meet shortly. Welcome again, everyone, to tonight's event. It's really exciting to see lots of people joining us tonight from all across the UK. Before we get started, just a few bits of housekeeping to run through. Overall, this call should last around an hour. We promise we'll do our best to not go over that, and obviously to respect everyone's time. You can access a live transcription by clicking the live transcription button along the bottom of the screen and then show subtitle. If you're joining from a laptop, desktop or tablet, you'll be able to choose either speaker view or gallery view in the top right-hand corner. Speaker view will allow you to see the person who's speaking on a large screen, whereas on gallery view, you'll see everybody on the call in a small square. Speaker view is probably the best for the majority of the call. We're going to keep everyone muted because there's so many people on the call and there's a lot to get through. But if you want to ask questions or ask for support, you can write in the chat box, which is at the bottom center of your screen, and we'll do our best to respond to any technical questions right away. We may pause the chat a few times during the call, for example, when we share links, so that they just don't get lost among the messages. This will be temporary, and then we'll enable the chat again afterwards. We're also recording this call, so if you prefer not to be recorded, you're welcome to turn your camera off now. And lastly, if you want to say hi, please type your name and where you're from in the chat box if you haven't already done so. And if you're calling in on a phone, you won't be able to do this, but don't worry, we still know you're with us. So why are we all here tonight? Well, we all care about the NHS, so these developments are likely to be a serious cause for alarm. Google being handed millions of NHS patients' data in breach of data protection laws, Amazon making moves to set up in competition with pharmacies to supply NHS patients with medicines, and signing agreements allowing them to use NHS information for its Siri service. Palantir, the shady Trump-linked corporation criticised by Amnesty International for its record on human rights, being handed big contracts to process NHS data. And happening right now, the huge GP data grab, which would allow our cradle-to-grave medical records to be used by profit-making corporations. Big tech and data firms are very interested in our NHS. The global health tech market was worth $106 billion in 2019, and some analysts have predicted it could be worth close to $1 trillion a year by the second half of this decade. Our health is big business, and the government has made it a priority that the UK is one of the global leaders in this new industry. Matt Hancock claimed that opening up the NHS to tech business is critical to making sure the UK wins the fourth industrial revolution. He wanted to make the NHS and its patients a real-world testing environment for these firms, making it as easy as possible for them to use our data. His replacement, Sajid Javid, with his links to JP Morgan and the financial sector, is very likely to see dollar signs in his eyes when he takes over. Many people believe that these technologies could revolutionize how healthcare is delivered in a similar way to how the internet transformed how we shop. This revolution could bring real benefits for patients' care, but there are big questions that we need to answer, and the government is repeatedly avoiding them. What kinds of companies will get our data? What say do NHS patients get? Is the government focused on patient care or the demands of big tech? And what does the rise of these companies mean for the future of a publicly run, publicly owned NHS? We've seen NHS patients die unable to access unaffordable medicines as powerful pharmaceutical companies use their monopolies to hold their lives to ransom. Could big data firms gain that power in the future? What do we need to do to stop it happening? The NHS New Deal set out a series of demands relating to big tech and health data, and Just Treatment is fighting with Foxglove and other organisations to protect our health data and the future of the NHS. So we're delighted to be joined by founder and co-director of the amazing legal campaign organisation Foxglove to talk about their work to make big tech fair and what we need to keep the NHS safe. So, without further ado, here's a quick rundown of tonight's agenda. First up, I'll be handing over to Corey, who will talk about why big tech is interested in the NHS, why we need to be worried, and what Foxglove are doing to protect the rights of NHS patients. Then Diarmuid will talk about Just Treatment's work on this issue, and we'll have a short Q&A session. Then we'll hear from Izzy, who's going to give us an update on the NHS New Deal campaign, explain our current organising plans and how you can get involved. And finally, I'll run through the key asks and actions that we need you to take to help build support for an NHS New Deal and stop the GP data grab and big tech's threat to our NHS. And lastly, if you're on social media, please help us spread the word by using the hashtag NHS New Deal. So now I'd like to hand over to Corey to kick us off. Remember, there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the presentations. So please do post any questions you have for Corey in the chat, and then we'll try to answer as many as we can. So over to you, Corey.
Thanks, Miriam, and thanks so much to everybody for coming on a Monday evening to dial into your 1000th Zoom of this pandemic and talk about the NHS. It's a sign, I think, of how much people care about the health service and the future of the health service that you can get people to pitch up at this time. I'm Corey, and with my friends and colleagues, Rosa and Martha, a couple of years ago, we set up Foxglove, which, as Miriam said, has the basic ambition and aim to make the use of technology fair for everybody. What does that mean and why? I guess we set it up basically because we started to feel that there was a real change in the way that companies and governments were exercising power over all of us. And that more and more and more, both governments and very, very large technology companies were using one or another kind of mass data system, information about all of us taken from us as we go about our business online or in our daily lives to make decisions about all of us. And some of those decisions were much more consequential and important than, say, whether some creepy ad followed you all over the internet, although I don't like that either, but that really had to do with potentially life-changing decisions being made by these computerized systems sitting somewhere that people couldn't see. And just to be clear, it's not as if humans can't be unfair to one another, and it's not the computer that's the problem. It's the way that the humans design a system, and we're hiding lots of contestable, challenging, controversial decisions behind this technical veneer. It was a kind of really systems, society-wide scale version of the old computer says no joke, right? So you probably heard of a couple of cases we did, and I won't talk about them in any detail, last year. The first one that we won was the UK's first judicial review of an algorithmic system in government. And that was an algorithm the Home Office had used to process every single visa application to this country from 2015 until now. So millions of people's rights to come here to study, to work, were determined in part by this algorithm, which turned out to be racist, and we got to the government to get rid of it in the face of a court challenge. The other one, which more of you will have heard of, had to do with the A-level crisis. So last year, because of the pandemic, of course, lots of students couldn't sit their exams. And so in their infinite wisdom, the government decided instead of people getting the grades that their teachers said that they would get, they would just distribute everybody on a curve, and that curve would be assigned by a computer algorithm. You won't be surprised to hear, and I'm sure that you read in the papers, that algorithm systematically hurt kids from big, struggling schools and systematically tended to lift up kids in small, independent schools and small subjects like class 6 at Eton. So anyway, in the face of a kind of 7-day kerfuffle and a legal case that we launched with a bright kid from a comprehensive school in Ealing called Curtis Parfit Ford, and 250,000 signatures on his petition, which, by the way, I'm really going to challenge all of you guys to get our petitions on this stuff up to anything like that level. But anyhow, the government obviously U-turned in 7 days. So that gives you a flavor of the kinds of things. We're not only focused on big tech, we're also focused on when the government uses technology in ways that we think are unfair. Anyway, you're here to talk about the NHS. So what's going on with the NHS in the pandemic? A little over a year ago, we watched with what I can only describe as alarm as the government announced that it was going to set up a new health data system of a kind that had never before existed in the history of this country to manage everybody's health data in one giant lake. They said that they needed to do this for the pandemic, and in general, that seems about right. I think probably everybody on this call is generally supportive of the idea that the NHS should have data to plan services where it needs to. But a whole bunch of names that were very concerning to us popped up on the list of contract partners that went out, by the way, with no competition and no bid. Because you probably have heard, but during the pandemic, all the usual rules on businesses bidding for contracts, those went out the window. The government said, look, it's an emergency and we just can't go through all these exercises, which is of course why you keep reading about one or another friend or crony or Matt Hancock's pub landlord winning a COVID contract. So anyway, with the data lake, all of the tons of different health data sources were pooled into this central lake, and it was being managed by some of the biggest and some of the most controversial names in American technology. So you had Amazon Web Services managing it, you had Microsoft behind the scenes providing some of the services, and you had two companies that were especially worrisome to us and especially controversial. You had Faculty AI, which is an AI company here in the UK, best known, I think, for providing the data science services to the Vote Leave campaign. And then there was one that really set off our alarm bells called Palantir. Now, Palantir, I don't know, most of you on the call may not have heard of them. They don't have the name recognition of a Google or a Facebook. But let me tell you, if you work for the military, a police force, or the security services, you absolutely have heard of them, because those are the parts of government with which Palantir has contracted since their founding. They were set up by a guy called Peter Thiel, and a couple of others, but Peter Thiel was one of the biggest tech donors to Donald Trump in his 2016 campaign and his campaign for re-election. And they are not, on any view, a health company. Time and again, their technology has been used not to heal people or support people to recover, but actually to harm. They work with border forces. They work in predictive policing. On an earnings call earlier this year, the COO of Palantir said his ambition was to see Palantir running in every missile and every drone in the United States. And so we just thought, well, hang on a minute. What is a company like this, a company that is, for all intents and purposes, a defense contractor, being done? What is the point of inviting them into the very heart of managing this incredibly sensitive pool of NHS health data? And it's happening at a time, of course, that the government, for good and sound public health reasons, was trying to get people to trust government health services, to come forward and accept, for example, a vaccination. You probably saw, for example, the UK government saying to undocumented migrants in this country, listen, don't worry, please come forward. That everything that you've heard about the Home Office taking NHS data is not, we're gonna put that down. We're not gonna deal with it. You're not gonna be dobbed into the Home Office if you come forward to get your vaccine. And so we thought, well, hang on, this is gonna be totally caustic to patient trust. And it can't be allowed to outlast the pandemic and get in there for the long haul. We also know from documents that were released to some journalists under the Freedom of Information Act, it still just about survives in this country, that actually this wasn't some kind of out of nowhere emergency system. It was from Palantir's perspective, actually, a long-term plan. So Palantir executives took the chair of the NHS for watermelon cocktails in the summer of 2019, so way before the pandemic was anybody's worst nightmare. They were basically pitching their ability to manage the sensitive sources of everybody's health data. Now, what Palantir like to say is, well, look, we're not like Google, we're not like Facebook, we're not like Experian, we're not a data broker, we're not going to take that profile of you and sell it on to someone else. And you know what? I don't have any reason to disbelieve that as such, right? That's not the point. But the point is, like various other of the contractors that you've read about in the past year, they want to hook themselves into the infrastructure of the NHS, where there is, of course, a huge appetite for public spending. There is a certain amount of government budget that always has to go, and make themselves an indispensable part of that central infrastructure. That's the problem. So we brought a couple of cases. I won't kind of bore you with the legal details of them, but with the news website Open Democracy. The first one was a transparency case that basically forced the government to publish the contracts with Palantir and these other companies. And then the second one, which the government walked back earlier this year without us having to go to the judge, was basically whether they would change this giant data lake to other purposes after the pandemic, without going back and talking to all of us and getting everybody's permission. Because remember, the only reason that they can do this, the only reason that they can pool everybody's data like this, the only reason that they can assign these contracts without procurement, the only reason they could go forward with it really at all without a meaningful, open, public engagement exercise was the pandemic. As the pandemic wanes and that excuse goes away, what we feared that they were hoping to do was take that emergency system and in some ways shift it to the steady, permanent state of affairs as we come out of the pandemic, and we're then stuck with these companies who, by the way, get more and more expensive each time the contract is renewed. So Palantir, in a classic model, the first one was free. They did the first contract for £1. On renewal, it went up to $1 million. And on the third renewal, which went by, again, without public competition in December of last year, it shot up to 23 million. What do you think is going to be next time? I don't know. So anyhow, big tech in the NHS. This May, the thing that we were worried about happened. The government decided to make a massive grab for a whole bunch of people's sensitive health data, not for pandemic purposes, but for the permanent state of affairs. And that was where we got in touch with DearMid and came forward with the kind of third case that we'll tell you about here. So what the government has decided to do, and again, this is supposed to outlast the pandemic, is to take everybody's health data that every time you sit down with your GP and you have an appointment and you tell them something, whatever it is, I mean, a bunion, alcoholism, fertility treatment, absolutely anything, there's a specific GP code that the GP writes down or encodes into your computer. Now, this is very different, and it's probably the single most important reason that the NHS is so interesting to big tech companies. This is the most important thing to understand. Other places aren't like this. You know, in America, where I, as you can hear, originally come from, we don't have a single payer system. So there's not like a consistent way of coding people's health information. But here in the NHS, there is, and there has been for decades. All the GPs have the same code for, say, heart disease. That's very different from a handwritten set of records where, because of the state of computers and their understanding of language at the minute, you know, it's not like you can write down has heart disease or doesn't have heart disease. And actually, because context is confusing, the computer may well mix one of those two things up. Whereas if you have a code, it's just straightforward. It's just an alphanumeric code that a machine can read for every single condition over the course of someone's life, over the entirety of the population. That means that we have an incredibly unusual and possibly globally unique data asset here in the United Kingdom, which is a population-wide, cradle to grave, longitudinal, really detailed health data set. Now, that is machine readable. Now, of course, from a planning perspective, that could be important. It could be important. I mean, in the pandemic, maybe it was important. There are interesting questions about whether actually you need to pool it all together nationally as opposed to regionally. Even the pandemic planning, most of it took place at regional level, but you can see how better use of NHS data would probably be good for planning purposes. But that level of data that is machine readable is also of absolutely intense interest to big tech companies like Google, or the AI arm of Google based in the UK, which is called DeepMind. I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but previously they had a couple of incidents of accessing various pools of health data. So at the Royal Free Hospital and at Moorfields Eye Hospital, some of which the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, basically said, look, you've taken over 1 million patients' records without proper processes. So there were some legal problems with that stuff. But anyway, they're all very interested in accessing this data set basically to build products off of, to train algorithms off of, products that you might then sell back to the NHS. And so that's another question that we had, and a real concern that we had is, hang on a minute, how is the NHS going to get public value for this incredible public asset, right? Assuming that it should happen at all. The other thing that was problematic about it was that the government just rammed all this through. I mean, if you have come to this call, then perhaps you've heard about the GP data grab, but I assure you that even now that puts you in a real specialist minority of people, because NHS Digital and the government announced it in May just by bunging it up on a government website, on a corner of the website, which is the kind of internet equivalent of putting it at the bottom of the stairs behind a sign that says, beware of the leopard. And they basically said, look, you know, if you find out about this, then you can print out a form and send it to your GP. So you got to find it online. If you're one of the 4 million people or so who are not online and over 65, then too bad for you. You better hope you hear about it on the radio. But anyway, you can find it online, but you can't opt out online. No, 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 no. You've got to go through the faff of printing out a form and handing it into your GP. So it was hard not to feel that they had set up the system in a way to deliberately make it difficult for people to exercise their right to step away from this giant aggregation of their health data. The other thing that concerned us about it is that they mushed up all kinds of different purposes into one under, a three-word slogan: data saves lives. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm slightly tired of being governed by three-word slogans. I mean, it might as well have been get data done. But anyway, there are a whole bunch of different purposes that they said they needed to aggregate the data for. We just talked about planning. Okay, well, make your case for that. Make your case for why you need to do it nationally. They talk about commissioning. And again, there are different forms of commissioning. Some of that stuff is good and positive. Some of it people find is being used to do backdoor privatization of the NHS. And then there is research. Now, there's a whole bunch of different kinds of research. Studies tend to show that if you sit down with patients and you walk them through how their health information is used, people are altruistic. They want to help the NHS out. They say, sure, take my data for planning if you need it. If you need it for commissioning, I guess so. Research, well, I mean, maybe if it's a charity or an academic body, or I don't know, if you're going to help cure kids' cancer, then go for it. But the moment that you start to talk about private companies coming in and profiting off of this asset, particularly if the NHS is then going to be put at some kind of financial disadvantage, that's when people's comfort levels really drop through the floor, right? And the government just threw all of this into a kind of slogan magic mix under data saves lives and said, look, brilliant, you've got 6 weeks to opt out. Print out your form, get it to your GP if you've heard about this, but we kind of hope you don't. And that was that. And we just thought that was rubbish, actually. So we just said probably unlawful. So we talked to Jeremy and some other people and built this kind of coalition. Just Treatment were first to join us, so thank you for that. But basically to say, hang on, this is exclusionary. People have had no meaningful chance to hear about it or to opt out. And if you don't fix it, then we will see you in court. Very shortly after that, after we threatened what's called an injunction, which is basically just running into the court to the judge and saying, make them stop, Joe Churchill, the minister, stood up in Parliament and said, look, we're going to pause. Data saves lives, but we need to talk to people. And then there's been a kind of back and forth and a debate. I mean, including as late as Thursday last week, there was a debate at 5 p.m., which was probably Matt Hancock's last appearance in Parliament as the health secretary, in which he was talking about GP data. And he appeared to say, actually, he was open to writing to patients, and yes, maybe it needed to go into a safe environment. And there's a whole bunch of questions around that we don't have time to talk about right now. But anyway, there are question marks over who gets trusted into the trusted research environment. But anyway, he makes a number of what appear to be compromises and concessions moving towards us. And then, of course, here we are on Monday, and he's gotten the axe. So what is the fate of this system? I think it remains to be seen. We are very concerned, though, that we not, under the cover of a crisis, see this incredibly important resource simply go handed over to private companies without people understanding what's going on, without people having a meaningful choice in the way that their health data is used, and without the NHS getting fair value for the asset. I'll leave you, I feel like I've been talking for a while, but I'll leave you with a final thought, which is this. I had a conversation the other day with a man he's a computer scientist who helped set up the health research arm of DeepMind. So this flagship AI company, one of the ones that, that the government is really keen to see flourish, and, fine. But he said, look, I favor health data research. He's not there anymore. I favor health data research. I think a lot of good things can come out of it. But the reality is, when the NHS sits down across the table from a Google, which is what that company is owned by, they are really just taking a knife to a gunfight. They are totally outclassed, totally outgunned, and they are not able to get fair value. Now, how are we going to change that? Because it's on all of us to change it. It's not enough to just say, oh, well, it's part of the post-Brexit industrial strategy. We got to make some money somewhere, so we might as well make it out of everybody's health data. Like, that's not good enough. We're talking about really sensitive material. So I'm glad that you're all here. There are a whole bunch of kind of public engagement resources that I think Dermot is going to tell you about, so I won't steal his thunder, but we've been so pleased to work with Just Treatment on this case. It may well be that the new health minister capitulates, but if not, we're going to have to take them to court to fight for people's right for a say in the future of the health data settlement of this country, and we hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Corey. Powerful stuff. The work you and the rest of the team at Foxglove do is so important. I'm sure there will be questions for you. Just a reminder to everyone to pop your questions in the chat and then we'll collate them for the Q&A. But first, before we get on to the questions, I'm going to hand over to Dermot to tell us a bit more about the campaign. So over to you, Dermot.
Thanks so much. I'm messing around with my view because I've turned my camera off for myself. I'm hoping I'll be able to see myself in just 1 second. I'm spotlighting myself. Okay, awesome. I think you should be able to see me now. So basically, thanks so much to Corey, and I'm going to try and be brief because I think it'd be great to get on to questions. But I'll say a few words about what Just Treatment's involvement has been in this. So I am the lead organizer with Just Treatment. We're a campaign group, as hopefully most of you know, that's led by NHS patients. We did a lot of work in the first few years of our existence around the impact of the pharmaceutical industry on patients' access to medicines on the NHS. And whenever we started to work on wider issues facing the NHS patients, one of the areas I really wanted us to focus on was the impact of big data and big tech firms on our healthcare. Because I think we see a lot of similarities actually between the kind of business models and the kind of ways that you see power concentrated within the pharmaceutical industry and the tech industry. So we know that powerful pharmaceutical monopolies allow people's lives to be held at ransom, basically, and it allows a small number of companies to impact the lives of lots of people and to extract huge amounts of money, and one of the most profitable industries in the world, from healthcare systems and from patients. And we saw some of those same trends playing out in how this new kind of revolution in health data was playing out, that there's a real risk that we'll see similar concentrations of power. And so whenever we first heard about this GP data grab, the first thing that I did was reach out to some of the patients that we work really closely with to ask them if they'd heard anything about it. And 201, they hadn't. They were absolutely shocked and they were really worried and angry about what was happening with their health data, with no information, with no communication from the government, and with no trust really that it was going to be used for their good and for the good of the NHS. And so we were really pleased to work with Corey and the rest of the Foxglove team, and then also with this wider group of people, which, by the way, includes people like you might expect, like Open Democracy and the National Doctors Association, but it also involves people like Conservative MP David Davis. So this is not something which is really a left or right issue. This is something which affects all of us, and which I think there is concern about how it's being done right the way across the political spectrum. So we want to make sure that two things really, that these changes are being done in a way that builds trust, because the core of good patient care is about trust in the relationship with our doctors and trust in the health system. And we want to make sure that it's being done so that it's being done primarily for the interests and well-being of patients, not to satisfy the interests and needs of businesses and corporations that want to get their hands on this data. And I think that's where one of our central concerns. We heard at the start about how Matt Hancock has eulogized about this incredible opportunity for the UK to make NHS as porous as possible for the kinds of firms that are developing this new health tech sector and this part of the economy. Now, that seems to me to ring alarm bells, that the UK is really focusing its response in a way that gives them the best possible opportunity to accrue as much investment and to be a center for this kind of health data, rather than seeking to do it in a way that prioritizes the care of patients' data, prioritizes designing systems that are equitable and deliver the best possible outcomes. And so that's a real worry, that if that kind of approach is what's underpinning the government, even if we get lots of information, even if there's good communication about it, that still doesn't resolve the central challenge, which is that the government appears to, or there's a risk that the government is doing this with a small number of companies' well-being in mind, not the well-being of the NHS and its patients. And so we're really pleased to be part of this. We were really delighted to work with Foxglove to write to the government. It was really interesting to see the kind of pathetic responses that we got back from them whenever they were posed with some really simple questions about the legality and the due diligence that they'd done, carried out in the performance of this shift. And so we're really pleased as well that the pressure that was brought to bear forced a delay, but that's absolutely just the start of the story and not the end. And it's something that's really at the heart of what Just Treatment wants to do in this wider NHS New Deal campaign. When we wrote about what the vision was for the future of the health service, included in that is a section around what we wanted to happen with our data. So to take control of it. As Corey said, this is a hugely valuable national asset. We want to make sure that it's being built upon, so it's used as a public resource and not just handed over to tech giants to be turned into a private commodity. We want to make sure that we don't find ourselves locking the NHS into a surveillance capitalist model where we have to rely on these corporations to deliver healthcare in the long term, something which could put the NHS as a public service as we know it at real risk. So we're really pleased to be working with Foxglove and Med Confidential and others to support this, and we really hope that others will do the same. There are a couple of simple things that you can do if you haven't already. Please do share sign the petition, which we're currently, Wiz has just done it. I'm just doing it. Share those as well. And Wiz, we're also really keen to get support financially, because this, if we have to go to the courts, we lose, we may be liable for the costs of the government. And so we've got a crowdfunder which we're asking people to contribute to along with the rest of the coalition, and you can donate at the link which Wiz has very kindly shared now. So this is really a really important piece of the picture for the future of our health service, and we're really pleased to be working with Foxglove and hope everybody can show their support for such a potentially transformative decision about the future of our healthcare. And I didn't speak for as short a time as I expected to either, Corey. You, I was just as verbose. Not that you were verbose, that came out wrong.
I was. No, I was. The problem is I'm going to have steam going and I don't shut up.
Sorry, Corey.
Thank you so much, David. It's been so inspiring hearing from both you and Corey. So thank you both so much. Really appreciate it. So now we've got about 10 to 15 minutes for some discussion. Maybe a bit less depending on the time. So if you have a question for either Corey or David, please post this in the chat box and we'll collate them to put to our two brilliant speakers. We know we may not be able to get through all the questions, but we will definitely do our best. So I'm just gonna throw two questions to start with. So regarding the NHS data grab, Hancock's gone. Would his replacement, Sajid Javid, wantonly break GDPR? And the second question is from Anna, saying, I wrote to NHS Digital a while ago to request clarification of their proposed data grab, and I'm yet to receive a response. I've been treated in numerous GP practices and hospitals in both England and Wales in recent years, some now closed, some now merged. I have no idea who I need to contact in order to opt out, nor at what date my records are considered active for the purpose of data collection, at point of creation or at point of data transfer. Do you have any information on this? So we'll start with those two questions.
Should I take the GDPR one first?
Sounds good.
It's basically, they wouldn't do that, would they? Surely they wouldn't burn the GDPR to the ground. Look, I wish that were so. I really wish that were so. And look, I hope that we'll come to some compromise position with the government. But the reality is that nothing tends to focus policymakers' minds like the threat of a judicial review. I don't know how many of these kind of papers that you have tripped over in the past couple of months, but there's one called the Tigger paper, TIGRR, Task Force on Innovation, Growth, and Regulatory Reform, in which it is suggested that, you know, the pesky GDPR might be got rid of. There's a bit of stuff about modernizing the health data regime as well in the data strategy that was published last week by Matt Hancock before things got slightly derailed. There is a lot of discussion in policy spaces, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom about watering down the GDPR and unlocking the power for innovation. And listen, I know in a way, probably most people on this call don't find the idea of data protection terribly exciting. I always joke they're the two least sexy words in the English language, and most people just associate them with like an interficious meddler with a clipboard and the fact that your web browsing experience now basically looks like this. But the reality is, it's a really important regulation that is, if anything, under enforced. And in a data sense, it's what keeps the chlorine out of your chicken. So we get rid of it at our peril. Then there was Darren, did you want to add to that at all from a kind of GDPR regulatory standpoint?
No, I think just really quickly to say that I think in all of this, you kind of got to assume the worst and hope for the best. I think there's no I think there's very little for us to see in the government's behavior that gives us any significant levels of confidence that they're going to go about this in a way that is best practice. You know, I looked today at a new health organization document looking at how data and AI for health should be managed. And those ethical principles that have been set out by the World Health Organization, the government, as you read down through them, and the way they've gone about this, have failed to meet those principles over and over again. And so, yeah, I think they will be stopped from doing this only if they're forced to.
I want to pick up the opt-out question, because everybody's confused about how the heck they opt out. And listen, don't feel bad about the fact that you're confused, because all the GPs are pretty confused too. I mean, this has been communicated so poorly that we have seen literally GP practices saying, we're not resourced to do this. Why have we been saddled with this in the middle of the pandemic? Hang on, I've got like thousands of letters suddenly coming in. What am I meant to do? And I see somebody asking about what's called the national data opt-out. I know this is confusing. This is not the system that any rational person would have built, but hang on and bear with me for a minute. In the NHS, there are actually 2 opt-outs. And it's like kind of slightly complicated to explain how they differ, but basically, right? If you click that Med Confidential link, then you will see the form to put in what's called a type 1 opt-out. Don't ask me why it's called type 1 opt-out. It doesn't matter for these purposes. But basically, that is the one that you print and send to your GP, and that should, in theory, stop your data leaving your GP for purposes other than your direct care. There's another one, and I think somebody may have dropped a link to this other later developed opt-out in the channel, in the chat channel, called the National Data Opt-out. Again, this is confusing. The National Data Opt-out covers not just GP data, it covers GP data and hospital data, but it doesn't stop the data leaving your GP. If you sign the National Data Opt-out, the data will still leave your GP and go to NHS Digital. It's just supposed to stop their using it onwards. So in some ways, this is a question of trust. Do you trust NHS Digital to kind of honor it, or do you want to keep it in the hands of the GP? Ronald Reagan had a phrase about trusting and verifying. But anyway, you may, while there are so many questions about these schemes, you may wish to cover yourself and your family by submitting both. But again, the clearest exposition of this very confusing system is to be found on Med Confidential's page, I think. So you might want to just go and have a look. And again, like, one of the things that is so tragic about all of this is that lots of people here are probably pro certain kinds of internal NHS use of this data. And the government hasn't given you like a tick box menu. It didn't say like yes to planning, yes to commissioning. Google, no, thank you. And so you've got to let everybody in and let everybody out, at least while the details of the system are being negotiated. I mean, where we at Foxglove would definitely like to get to is some kind of middle path through this. The last time the government tried to pull everybody's data, and I won't bore you with it, there was a system called care.data about 7 or 8 years ago. That just went poof in the face of everybody's objections and millions of opt-outs. And so the baby very much went out with the bathwater at that time. A whole bunch of positive and public-spirited uses of health data weren't then possible because the government wouldn't address or engage in a realistic way with people's concerns about privatization. And it would be really nice if we could just get to a place where these things were separated, but it's too soon to say. So you may wish to protect yourself in the meantime.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to throw another 2 questions at you guys. So GP data uploaded, well, you said that GP data uploaded will be shared with authorised NHS partners. Would this include NHS 111, which of course is run by French company Citel? Would Citel then retain that in their systems, and would they then own that data? And then the second question is, given the nature of the dangers of setting up an NHS data bank and the access it presents to private firms at the expense of patients, does Just Treatment and Foxglove not need to form a coalition with other NHS campaign groups such as KOMP, Open Democracy, We Own It, just to name a few, to increase our effectiveness to fight back against the government?
I think I saw Tony from KOMP on the call. Hi, Tony. I mean, we work with these guys all the time. And in fact, actually, some of those organizations, or I can't remember who we're talking about as part of the case. I mean, there's a big coalition already bringing the actual litigation, but allow me not to oversell what judicial review can achieve. So it's really important. Like, judicial review has bought us time, and I hope it will buy us more time, and I hope it will be an important part of the negotiation with the government. But ultimately, it can, the thing that will ultimately win this is politics and a movement. And the best that judicial review can ever achieve is to open up that space for the proper view about what the future of the NHS should be to come forward. And that's where we all really kind of need to join together. So Open Democracy is already present. So the coalition, if you are interested, is Just Treatment, Open Democracy, All the Citizens, which is an impact journalism nonprofit. God, I'm going to forget someone.
The Doctors
David
Association,
Davis MP. Oh, and the Doctors Association UK, the
and
Doctors.
the National Pensioners Convention.
And the National Pensioners Convention, the largest campaigning group of older people in the United Kingdom, with 1.6 million members in their umbrella group. So huge, diverse range of people who are litigating. But actually, as I say, there's a much, much broader political debate to be had. And we talk a lot to the groups that you're mentioning, and I really hope everybody will kind of pile in together and win the political battle, because ultimately, this is about winning the political argument. What was the other question?
Should I maybe just quickly jump in on that one, which is to say about like NHS 111 and the French company that owns that. So first of all, yes, it's highly likely that data will be used by NHS services and also companies that are providing them, providing those services. I think one of the biggest frustrations we have with what the government has done is there's been an absolute dearth of detail about under what circumstances, which companies and which organizations will get access to the data, how it will be used in the long term, under what circumstances companies might be prevented from accessing that data, any companies or organizations that would be blocked from using it in the first place. And so like a large part of what we're asking for the government to do in the time that it remains before the new deadline arises is to expand greatly the information and the clarity around those kinds of questions, which I think at the minute we can make some assumptions potentially about how that data will be used, but it's very, very unclear from the level of information that the government website has so far provided.
Thank you. Okay, last question, literally 30 seconds to respond to it. Quite a big question, to be honest, but what would these companies use our data for?
Oh God, all kinds of things. So if you're pharma, you want to develop a drug, potentially. So you want to test a drug, partly using mass data, and the drug you then sell. Or maybe you want to test the safety of your drug. You want to see how it got side effects, right? And again, I don't know, views can reasonably differ about the relationship between the NHS and private companies in general, right? It's not like the NHS is going to start developing all of its own drugs, probably. But how to get fair value for this asset, if we're talking about this as a kind of public asset, that's a really legitimate and important public policy question. And then let's take DeepMind and Dearman. I'm sure you'll have some other examples, but DeepMind with the Moorfields Eye Hospital kind of dipped in and developed a kind of diagnostic tool off the back of access to Moorfields Hospital's eye data. They couldn't have trained their algorithm without access to that publicly funded data set. And as I understand it, Moorfields is now paying for access to the tool that could not have been developed without that publicly funded data set. So it's this question about relationships. I mean, yes, the company provides expertise in science that at the minute the NHS doesn't have, which you might think also raises some core questions about what we bring in-house to have a future fit NHS. But they can't do it without the data. And so, you know, if there's going to be that kind of relationship, and that's an if, then how to get public value for it is a really deep and important public policy question.
Thank you so much. There are actually a couple of other questions, but unfortunately we've kind of run out of time. So maybe we can answer some of them in the chat, or we'll try and get back to people after this call. So thank you so much, Corey and Dermot, again, and thanks to everyone for your great questions. This can sometimes feel like quite a complicated and distant subject. So your presentations and the discussion help to really bring home why it is so important to take on big tech and the government for the good of the NHS and patients. Just Treatment's crowdsourced NHS New Deal has core demands on protecting the NHS and our data from big tech firms. So I'm now going to hand over to my co-host Izzy, who's going to run through where we're currently at with the NHS New Deal campaign. So over to you, Izzy.
Thanks, Mariam, and hi everyone. It's great to be here with so many people tonight who want to organise to win a fully funded and truly public NHS that works for all of us. I'm a Just Treatment patient leader, and I got involved with Just Treatment because essentially I rely on the NHS to stay alive, and I've experienced problems with access to medication through having cystic fibrosis. I watched people I care about die because they couldn't get access to life-saving medication, and I became a patient leader as the pandemic started, and it was really important for me to get involved with campaigns that were working towards making sure the COVID vaccine was accessible to everybody, and making sure that we have an NHS that cares for patients and staff. And yeah, that's why I wanted to get involved. And yes, so some of you some of you may not know about the NHS New Deal, how it's been created and where it's come from. And in a nutshell, the NHS New Deal is a set of demands that Just Treatment has crowdsourced from the views and experience of NHS patients across the UK. The New Deal is a product of over 1,500 people's contributions on what they want for the future of the NHS. And so it truly is a people-powered campaign. The New Deal sets out the vision for a fully funded, truly public NHS, which respects health workers, gives patients the power to shape its future, and ensure everyone gets the quality of care we all deserve. Our plan to win a New Deal is based on these three key facts. If politicians wanted to change things, they can. The pandemic has shown that MPs can do things, but only with enough pressure. There is huge support out there for the NHS. Last year, millions of us clapped for carers, painted rainbows in our windows, but we need to turn that support into action. Politicians care about votes, and many of them won by slim margins. We can use this leverage to hold MPs to their promises and show that if they don't back an NHS New Deal, they'll lose in the next election. And our organising strategy centres on three simple principles. We will use our NHS stories to bridge the political divide and engage people of all parties in the campaign. We will use our relationships to move people to action because people trust the word from friends and family above everybody else. We'll use people-powered tactics to show the depth of support, build our movement, and put concrete pressures on our politicians to act. These are the strong foundations that the NHS New Deal campaign is built upon. And since we've launched the campaign 4 months ago, we've been blown away by the response. Over 22,000 people from across the UK have added their name in support of the New Deal. More than 230 people have signed up to become NHS New Deal organisers in their constituencies. Hundreds of supporters have together donated thousands of pounds to help the campaign grow. The NHS New Deal has been endorsed by 13 organisations and counting, including our friends at Foxglove who are here tonight. But there are so many threats to our NHS right now that we need to keep organising, from the GP data grab to the new NHS bill that will put healthcare corporations in positions of power on new boards deciding what care patients will receive. In the coming weeks and months, NHS New Deal organisers will be taking a lead on arranging meetings with MPs in their constituencies to talk to them about the New Deal and persuade them to support it. On the 17th of July, we're working with We Own It to organise a series of actions across the country. You can join us this day next week with John McDonald to find out how you can get involved. We sent a few emails about this, so check your inbox for more details. We will also continue to work with Foxglove and a small coalition of allied organisations to fight the government in the courts if we have to prevent our data being handed over without proper consent to profit-making companies. If you don't want your details shared, there's a link in the chat box to guide explaining how to opt out. There are also a few simple actions that you can take that will make a massive difference as we try to force the government to change course and to start to put patients before the interests of powerful big tech firms. I'm going to hand back over to Mariam to share those and wrap up the call.
Thank you so much, Izzy. So it's clear there's never been a more important time to fight for an NHS that is there for all of us. For this to happen, we need as many people as possible to take action. There are two key things that we really need people to do. Number one, we need everyone to help spread the word about the government's dodgy handover of NHS patient data to profit-making companies. And number two, we need support on our legal action against the government by supporting our crowdfunder. If you haven't done so already, here's how you can get stuck in right away tonight. Just a flag, we will temporarily pause the chat function so the links we're about to post don't get lost. So with that, we've come to the end of the call. Thank you so much to our speakers, Corey and Diarmuid, and my co-host, Izzy. But above all, thank you so much to each and every one of you who took time to join us here tonight. Whether you're already actively involved or you're new to the campaign, it's so brilliant to have you on board. Let's get out there and get thousands more signed up to the NHS New Deal campaign so that we can organise to win an NHS where private profits are never put before patient health. Bye everyone, have a great night, stay safe, and we'll see you again soon.